Welcome to the next exciting panel for Baltimore Comic-Con Online. My name is Amy Dallen. I talk comics all over the internet, wherever possible. And today I am thrilled beyond belief to get to introduce the man who wrote the book on love and thrills in comics. Please welcome Terry Moore.
Hi, what a great introduction. Thank you.
It's so very nice to meet you.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I've been doing my own TerryCon sort of this weekend as well. So I've been doing panels on Instagram and Facebook and doing Baltimore at the same time. It just feels like a real Comic-Con weekend.
If you're getting enough sleep, it's not a convention, right?
Right.
Well, first off, for anyone watching this who might not be familiar with Terry Moore's incredible body of work yet, I actually stole my intro quote a little bit from my favorite pull quote about your work, which is from the back of the Strangers in Paradise Pocket Edition, when Neil Gaiman said, "What most people don't know about love, sex, and relations with other human beings would fill a book. Strangers in Paradise is that book."
Man, I've been living off that quote forever.
But of course, Strangers in Paradise is an incredible work, but you have also added to that, you're branching out into all kinds of different genres. You are a titan of self-publishing. I want to get into as much of it as possible. And if you're watching this, I hope that you have a lot of questions as well, because if you start preparing them, you could throw up question before it in the chat if you want. We have someone who's going to be watching out and collecting those, and you can ask your questions to Terry Moore when we get to that portion of the panel.
I'm not afraid. Go ahead.
Well, first off, just to get that out of the way, what would be the scariest question someone could ask you?
Oh, what's next? Right?
Well, I'm definitely going to ask that one.
Fortunately, I have an answer this time.
Excellent. So I'd like to start actually at the beginning, if we could, because I was very interested to find that you came to the world of comics having tried some other forms of art or incorporating those. You came from the worlds of music and from film, and I think you can see that in a lot of your work, but why comics?
It was something that I was, even as a little child, itty bitty, I had sketchbooks. I have a sketchbook in my archives right there from when I was about 8 years old. So it's just something I love doing. And I tried the music business and it wasn't really a great fit. And then I went to the editing, like you said. And after a while, editing is about creative by committee. So I wanted to be more solo with my ideas and not have to talk 100 people into it. So I thought about, what can I do? And I remembered my cartooning, my love for cartooning. I'd been doing it at nights anyway, but just about that time is when I discovered self-publishing movement. There was this big movement in the early 90s, and I saw these other people doing it, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to try that. And boom, here I am.
So from my perspective, at least, it seems like you were one of the pioneers of self-publishing, and you are going on 30 years there, right?
I'm technically not. If you go back into your ancient history book, right after the Egyptian dynasty, there was this first Brat Pack wave that had 6 to 8 people in it. And you know what? Neil Gaiman was part of it for a short time because he was brand new to DC Vertigo. But he ran with that pack, and it was Jeff Smith and Dave Sim and Colleen Duran and Charles Vess and a lot of people. That's the group I saw that inspired me. And that was like 1992. And then I came in 93 or 94, and they're the ones who encouraged me. I would go talk to them at a show and I'd say, how do you do that? And they were very generous with their time. And they, Jeff Smith especially took me under his wing and said, here's how I do it. Here's my printer. Here's what you got to fill the orders, and they pulled me along. So thank you to them, the first generation. I'm the second generation X-Men.
It's a good generation. You're Wolverine and Storm,
There you go.
So what has changed in that? I mean, what hasn't changed? But looking back now, jumping into it in 1993, what would surprise 1993 Terry Moore about where things have gone since then?
One thing that I knew would always be around is comics, because I'm old enough to remember comics going through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. So even though every 3 years it looks like everything's going to end and be different, comics was always there somehow. So that's kind of what I was looking for. I wanted to be in an industry that would be here till I croaked. And I had a lot of faith in comics surviving whatever happens, you know. I still have that faith. I still think that one way or the other, there will always be cartoonists making stories, and one way or the other, we'll see them. So what I did not expect, because it had never happened before, was that nowadays we have a way to make a comic and share it directly to your audience. That didn't exist in 93. In 93, you really did have to go to the building in New York and talk an editor into it, and they had to talk other people into it. So you had to have, you know, there were those obstacles. And that's why there were, I think that the people that were being published was a much smaller pool. And now the people being published is, you know, do it yourself. Why wait? Why do you need a middleman? And that is the surprise for me. When I started, the internet had just kind of kicked in, and people like
We had some Usenet, you know, we had some mail lists.
There was CompuServe.
Mm-hmm.
There was a thing called that. And that's where I first talked to people like Neil Gaiman and Bill Willingham when they were very first working. And Frank Miller was very accessible. He was all over the place. So early days, you know, and you think, okay, we still got to go to the DC office and talk somebody into it. And now you don't.
Now, eventually, I want to circle back to your major works, but since you happened to bring it up, you did either get talked into or talk someone into playing around with some superheroes in some wider worlds, and on what happens to be you have great comics and you have great taste. Birds of Prey and Runaways, two of my all-time favorite series. If you could maybe briefly talk about what was that period about? Were you just trying out different things, or scratching an itch, or did someone just come along with an offer you couldn't refuse?
Well, all that, I really do love comics, and I was always really keeping up with what everybody else was doing. I was a big fan of those books that you mentioned, and their creators, especially the writers. And like for instance, the Birds of Prey, that just kind of was one of those things where the DC office used to be about 30 people that we all knew. So you would have conversations with people, the editors, and they would say, why don't you try this, you know? And you can squeeze it in between your schedule. And you would talk about it for a year, and then the time would come and you would take your shot, you know, you would do a book. That's why we all used to really love going to conventions, because the editors would be there and you could shake hands and have a Coke with Karen Berger, you know, or whoever, and actually talk about ideas. And they would say, you know, I've had this on the desk for a long time, and I'm looking for the right person. Would you be interested? So it really was that, you know, that friendly. And that was kind of how, DC style, that's how Birds of Prey happened. Just an invitation, and said yes. And then I did some books for Marvel. That was the thing that I did was the Runaways. Brian K. Vaughan was going to leave, and then Joss Whedon did a little run on it, and they were looking for somebody to kind of do a run after that. And I think it was just kind of to close it out. And I love that book, so I said yes. And I think it timed out so that it was right after I finished Strangers in Paradise, this long run, and I wanted to do something else for a year, and that was what did that. So I did that, and I called up on the phone in the morning and said, I talked to Joe Quesada, and I said, you know, I want to do something else for a few months. Do you have anything that, you know, that I might be able to fill in on? And he said, let me check, I'll call you back. And he called me back that afternoon and offered me that, Runaways, but he also offered me Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane. So I got 2 books in one call. And I didn't want to turn either one down, so I said, yeah. And I took on 2 books at once. And I actually loved doing the Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane because it was the cast in high school, which is my favorite period, where you still have Gwen Stacy and Flash and Liz and all that, and Harry. And I loved it, just loved it. It was a great experience. And they're all nice people.
And you said in an older interview that Spider-Man was the character that you identified with most. Did that get to scratch that itch a little bit?
Yes, it did. And well, I loved him as a kid and as a teen because he was us. He was, you know, he was in high school when all this stuff happened in my version, the one I read. And so I could relate to being a teenager and going home and take your shoes off to your socks and climb up on the ceiling for the first time and think, oh my God, I really can't stick to the ceiling, you know? And I just like that aspect, that reality aspect of it. And then he had to go get on a bus or a train and then go from Queens into Manhattan to go find Trouble. And then after he finished Trouble in Manhattan, he would have to take the subway back to Queens, you know? There was all this.
As a kid reading that, I don't think I really fully processed like how much distance there was between those points. It was like he has to get on a subway or something. How does that work?
Before I ever went to New York, I just thought he lived in Manhattan somewhere, you know, and everybody lived in Manhattan.
Yeah,
I didn't realize they were commuting in. So you actually have to get on the subway and go into town and look for Trouble. And I just thought that was so funny.
So I think for your independent works, let's start at the very end. Did you always have in mind something like 5 years that would bring together all of these disparate worlds in your work? Was that a secret master plan, or were you just like, what would happen if we did this?
You know, my journey, it looks like if I was a car and you were following me down the road, it looks like I'm making all the correct turns and we're just going right to our destination. But inside the car, it is chaos. The maps are flying. The internet won't work. Where do we go? Where do we go? You missed it. You know, that's me. I kind of started out with this really small core cast in Strangers in Paradise. And then I had a vision that, you know, I'd have these two opposite girls, and through the course of the story, they would change to the other, be more balanced. They start off polar, they get more balanced. And then by the time I finished that story, it was so long and I had such a big cast, I thought, I have people living all over the country now in Strangers in Paradise. That's my core cast. So the next story, I wrote it in California, and I thought, well, surely there's somebody in California that I can, like, you know, nudge. And by the end of the story, there was, you know. And then the next book, wherever I went, there was an SIP character. And I just began thinking about the science fiction writer Harlan Ellison. Not Harlan, bless his heart, I love him. Robert Heinlein. Robert Heinlein had all these books, and he got about halfway through his career, and he decided, these all fit together. And if he used his one main character, Lazarus Long, as the golden thread, he could tie it all together into one big Harlan. I keep saying Harlan, into one big Heinlein verse.
Harlan Heinlein sounds like the superhero name that
Harlan
the combo
Heinlein
character would have. Yeah,
that's not easy to say. Harlan Heinlein. And then Stephen King did the same thing. You know, he did Dark Tower and wrapped it all together. So it was just kind of one of those things that happens when you get a lot of it on the table, and you think, you know what, this actually does all happen in the same era, our time, current time, and they're just in different towns. What if they all do this, you know? So you just find a good national, global reason to bring them together.
It was a good reason.
I feel like I have this ensemble acting class, you know, and they can play any role and they'll come in and take over this, you know, let's do this year, let's do this next year.
That's actually, I love that you put it that way, because one of the things that I love so much in your work is that it does feel like seeing characters who are real people growing across time, but played by actors that you recognize, their style, the way they deliver lines, the facial acting in your art. It very much felt like watching like a reunion series where they brought the casts back from your other favorite shows. So this is a big question, but what would you describe as the Terry Moore approach to story? How are you synthesizing all of those elements into comic book storytelling?
My number one rule is the more people know, the more they care. So I have consciously thought about this, that I wanted to, after having done an editing career where everybody wanted to be in at the right moment of action, stop at the last moment of action, get out. I wanted to get there early and leave late in the comic, because a minute before everybody else came into the room was a very interesting conversation. And then when we all leave the room, they say more stuff, and that's the stuff you really want to know what they said. And I thought, I'm going to do Strangers in Paradise that way. I'm going to go ahead and invest the page time, you know, it takes several pages, to watch them just chat casually first. And then the problem enters the room, you know, so that you know a little more about them. You know what they think about hot fudge sundaes and eating cereal at midnight, and maybe they're struggling with a boyfriend or their mom's dog that won't shut up, or it's just all these little details in life that make you feel like you're there. You can relate to it. And then if I cut all that out, you would have basically just a John Wick movie. Suddenly, something crashes into the room, everybody goes flying, they chase him, there's a big fight, cut out immediately the minute something explodes. Well, that's fun to watch, but I don't know who it happened to, or, what the back's, So the more you know, the more you care. And I spent the page time on it.
That laughter is me suddenly realizing how much I would watch a Kachu versus John Wick standoff.
Oh, John's going down. He's met his match.
So you knew when you started that you had this idea of two very different women who would come together sort of in terms of personality. So that element, you did know where you were going. Mm-hmm. How did you, because Strangers in Paradise starts in, if you've read a lot of long-running comics, folks in the audience, you know that a lot of times they take a long time to become what they are. But there are other books, oddly enough, like Spider-Man and Strangers in Paradise, where basically from page 1, things seem really clear. How did you arrive at Kachu and Francine? And how did it seem so well-formed at the beginning, even if we had no idea how much was coming for us in the journey that they would take?
Yeah, you know what? The shortcut to skip a lot of talking is if I tell you that my Francine and Kachu you could really get a good head jump on them if you just start with Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane. Right? Come on. Let's go back to what I was reading when I was 10. That's it. If you took Gwen Stacy, and she's the girl next door, the girl you asked to babysit your kids, the reliable, just look at her personality. And then look at Mary Jane, off the chain, wild. She's going to get into some trouble in her 20s. I just took that and expanded it and updated it and made it more extreme. If I look at it now.
Did you know you were doing it at the time?
No. At the time, I thought I was doing Jennifer Connelly and Christina Applegate. That was my casting call. And I just thought there were a couple of movies where Jennifer Connelly played the girl next door, like in Rocketeer. And then Christina Applegate, as Kelly in Kelly Bundy, was just, you knew that whatever she stayed out late every night, and whatever she was doing, it was up to no good. And we know these two people in school. We have friends like this in school, and I always knew two girls like that in school. And then when you hit your 20s, you still know them, but it's different. But I really just kind of pulled back to my teenage years to think about those archetypes. And especially in my first career as a musician, when I was in bands working clubs every night, there was a bartender who tended to work all the bars in town, and she was very Kachu-like, and she had a funny name, but she was built just like her, and she had black hair, and we all liked her, and we all gave her respect and space, and she was just very cool. And I think probably that if you mix all this together, you've got the recipe.
Absolutely. One thing you do, interestingly, based on, I can definitely see, and you put references in the book to the Jennifer Connelly side of Francine. But one thing I want to bring up, just as a reader of your works, not to put you on the spot, but you were clearly doing it on purpose. You spotlight different body types in your comics in a way that was very unusual in the early 90s and remains somewhat unusual now. I think things have sort of happy to say developed and grown in that area, but that was also in place right from the start. Did that come from experience in other genres, just your own personality, your interests? Much as I love Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane, you can basically copy paste them onto each other for a lot of things. As a Betty and Veronica fan, I will say I grew up on a lot of carbon copy women, and I love them very much, but it means that it hits like a hurricane when you pick up something like Strangers in Paradise for the first time. Was that intentional? Did you know how that would affect people, or were you just doing it because it seemed right?
No, by the time I started the first issue of Stranger in Paradise, I was a diehard feminist. I had, in the late 80s and early 90s, is when we started getting a new wave of female stand-up comedians. And they were so mad. Funny, but mad. And once I started listening, I began to get this imagery in my head, a new perspective. Instead of looking at life like a guy, I began to get on a neutral fence and look at guys and girls. And by the time it was over, I started Stranger in Paradise, I had this opinion that, well, I grew up in a house of women. I married immediately. I've been living with a woman all my life. And I know what it's like to hear the stories from them about all the affronts that come every single day. And it's like living on a planet full of predators. And you didn't ask for any of it. And you're just trying to be your best person and have your friends and have your life and your nest. And all this other shit comes in and you didn't ask for it. You didn't ask for people to stare at you. Back off. Stop. Leave me some space. And I began to get into that. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. And so we have Kachu, who is very militant and very angry. But then we also have Francine, who has not started that transition, and she's getting all the crap. She's a very attractive person, but she did not ask for all this crap that comes with it. The baggage that comes with being attractive is almost not worth the price that you pay. And so that was the story I was giving her. And it was something for these guys to have conversations with her where they were, look how long it took for guys to take her seriously in the story, right? And by the end of Strangers in Paradise, she has found her footing. She's found her strength. You really see her tear into the ex-boyfriends and take the power back and all that. And she did it in a natural transition way where it was growth throughout the story. I mean, you can't do that in a miniseries. Thank God I had 100 issues to do it. But that was the most gratifying part, was watching these two women who were not balanced are, well-rounded. Kachu was too angry. Francine was too naive. You put them together, they kind of battle it out, and then they both come out on the other side as more rounded people that are going to have much happier lives from then on. So I wanted it all to have a happy ending. That's for sure.
Oh, and for which I would say we are all very grateful. Because you don't pull punches on the heartbreak along the way, but And I'm sure it would have been an epic story had you gone in a different direction. But I happen to be personally glad that
Thank
that
you.
was always the plan.
I was at first I was thinking it would be more traditional tragic love affair stuff, but then 9/11 happened about halfway through the run.
Huh.
And after that, I thought, no, everything I do from now on is going to have hope and happy endings, you know. So it changed my whole writing style. And post 9/11, I read about a man in Japan who survived the bomb. And he was an artist. And he spent the rest of his life dedicating himself to painting pictures that brought people peace and tranquility. And I thought, you know, that's how 9/11 affected all of us at the time.
It gives you a new value for peace. I'm loving some of these comments going by. The comments on Francine, the person who accurately pegged that my whole mood right now is I can't believe this is happening. Thank you so much. Please do keep. We will get to questions in maybe just another 10 minutes or so. But let's talk about once. I could talk about Strangers in Paradise forever, but you have added many new corners, and part of that it seems like has been maybe a desire to play with different genre stuff. You get an awful lot of territory in Strangers in Paradise, but you've now taken on science fiction and horror. What has been the biggest challenge or the most fun one to discover in Echo and Motor Girl and Rachel Rising and your other work since then?
The biggest challenge, of course, is always doing something you're not immediately connected with. I mean, it's not something that comes easily. So that's a challenge. Like I would say doing the Motor Girl story. The Motor Girl is a story about a veteran who's done 3 tours, gets injured, comes back with PTSD, and has issues, and is trying to work it out. So it's a kind of a combination between Wizard of Oz, where you start off thinking this is just a goofy story, and then you realize everything means something. That versus, you know, the Hurt Locker. If you mixed Wizard of Oz and Hurt Locker, you come up with this weird story.
Safely, we can say that's a sentence that's never been uttered, which is always a good reason to talk about something.
That's what you hope for in a story pitch. A story pitch is a sentence that you've never heard before, and you go, "Ooh, yeah." So that was tricky, and I thought about it for a year before I started. And I remember having a conversation at New York Comic-Con. I was walking the floor in Artist Alley, stopped to talk to somebody, and they mentioned something along those lines. And I said, you know, I'm thinking about doing a story about PTSD. And this guy turns out to be a therapist in his day job. And we had a conversation about it. And there was a guy in Chicago that I see at every show. And he's a vet that came back. And he introduced himself to me. And he had written me a letter from the palace in Baghdad when the Marines got there, and said, I'm sitting in the palace and I'm reading your comic, and thank you for the distraction, the entertainment while we're here. Things are going well. And then years later, I meet him at Chicago Comic-Con, and you know, he's rebuilding his life. But these guys, you can see it. They have seen things that we don't see. And, you know, it affects you. And every time that guy left the table, I cried. And so I bring that home. And when it's time to sit here, that's all in my head, you know. So that was a tough one. That really gutted me to make that story. But I feel so glad. I'm so glad that I made it. And then after I put it out, I did get letters from vets, you know, who said, yeah. So.
I've met a lot of service members who are big comic book fans, and a lot of us who grew up as Army brats who ended up being comic book fans. There seems to be there's a lot of crossover there, whether it's escapism or imaginations or superheroes. Obviously, explain a lot of it. But
I was born on an Air Force base, and so I'm very like, you know, you guys, so proud of you. So.
So let's see. I wanted to make sure that we do ask the scariest question that I can throw at you. What is next? Can you tell us a little about Ever and Serial before we get to the Q&A?
Yes. Where is Ever? Oh, it's right here.
Excellent. Oh my gosh!
This is Ever.
A Baltimore Comic-Con exclusive, I hope, just, or I'm declaring it. You can feel free to show everyone else anyway, but...
This is my cover, but you'll get a better cover. Look at that.
Oh my gosh!
I know. That's a lot of drawing. But that's the one page I've been free to show.
Oh my goodness. Well, that certainly answers the question of you still work traditionally.
Yes, I do. All the lettering is on the pages. Here's a page from, what is this? This is Strangers in Paradise 25. And you can see that I do the old-fashioned way.
Oh my gosh.
Just because I love it. I mean, I want this piece of paper in my life, you know. I have this thing where I love the convenience of computers, but a JPEG is worthless. You know, so I have like 65 pages there that I will feed out into the world. But if I had 65 JPEGs, I couldn't sell them for a nickel. So that's why I still work traditional.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you have an incredible brush line, which I know a lot of folks can make that transition. And I certainly I think I have officially lost the ability to tell which way things are done because people and the technology is so good now that incredible work is coming out in multiple forms. But still nice to see.
Yeah, I feel like the last of it, you know, like one of those rare bears in the zoo or something. There's not, because things are hard. Like when I was on deadline and you're trying, and it's all due tomorrow and you have to make changes. Oh, what a pain. I'm getting out my little removable labels and an X-Acto knife. It's 1958 in here. And I cuss just like a 1958 guy when it's time, you know. And it would be so easy to put it in Photoshopping, you know. But yeah, I do some tweaking in Photoshop after I scan them, but I want the page to look as much like the book as possible. So yeah, you just put in the time, and it's very time consuming. But at the end of the day, I have these things, and they're like miniature paintings or illustrations for me. So you know, I like that. I like being able to go around, and you never know when you're going to walk into a Norman Rockwell somewhere, you know, and then you look at it and you think, wow, he made that in 1965, and there it is, and you can touch it, you know. That's cool. And I can't think of how many times I've scrolled past Norman Rockwell on the computer Google search, and I don't care. Blah, 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 blah.
They still get me, I will say, but it's
I
not,
look
it
at
isn't
them, but
the same.
yeah, you know, like, oh, okay, there's like 3,000 Norman Rockwells on the screen. That's cool. But if I see a real painting, like, whoa.
You're putting those artifacts out into the world.
Yes. I like Johnny Appleseed. Those are my little trees there. And they take on a life of their own. They go through owners like violins, you know. I tried to get them all out because every artist has in their biography, there's always a chapter about the studio fire, right?
Yes.
So you need to get all these out. There's a lot of people. The only reason we have like Van Goghs and things like that is because people took them away from them. So you have to get that art out.
I had never thought about that. There was a preservation angle to putting them all around the world in a million different little safe houses.
Yes. It's like a Terry virus. You'll never track it all down. Anyway, so I just finished it, and it's at the printer.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's at the printer, and it comes out mid-November. And then in January, to answer your question, the serial is about this precious, darling little child called Zoe. Just the cutest little thing. You might want to have her over to your house to play with everybody. She's a 10-year-old serial killer, and she was introduced in Rachel Rising. And if you look at the first cover that's on the internet now, it'll kind of give you an idea of what Zoe's about. She's been in several of the books, and I would say that Kachu and Zoe are the two fan favorites out there.
I am very much looking forward to that. A serial killer story. Why? Just because she's fun, or because you wanted to try the genre, or a mix of both?
Well, I'm not wired right, Amy. There's something defective going on in here. When I was doing my comic strips, just for myself at home, I was about to tell you about Lizzie Borden, but it actually starts before Lizzie Borden.
Okay.
When we were still in high school, we would go to the drive-in theater, and I remember the midnight showing was Reanimator. And we went and got a bunch of Jack in the Box tacos and French fries and went and sat on the hood of the car and watched Reanimator. And there's just so much blood in Reanimator, it just became hilarious. It was like a food fight in National Lampoon. I mean, they were just going to slip on it and swim through it and dive through it. It was just blood, blood, blood. And we laughed so hard that night. I don't know if it was the tacos or whatever that guy was smoking over there. But it was just hilarious. I think Reanimator is like one of the funniest movies ever made. It's a joke for me. And then later on, when I was cartooning, I'm so sorry I said that phrase, it's a joke. I don't ever want to use those kind of phrases anymore. The whole thing's a disaster, a joke. Years later, when I was doing comic strips, I said, I was reading about Lizzie Borden, and it's a terrible thing, and it happened in a small town. And for some reason, I got the idea to do a comic strip version of it. And so I did these comic strips where Lizzie Borden was very Victorian and her parents were Victorian. And she was walking around the house with an axe all the time in her hand. And she was about to pop. She was about to crack. So the strips were just about Lizzie before she cracks. I mean, she's just so, like a kettle steaming.
As a time bomb, yeah.
Yeah, time bomb. So that was the idea of, like, how do you approach a story about an axe murderer and get a comic strip out of it? And I did. So years later, I'm doing this story, Rachel Rising, about this scary town. And I knew that there would be a serial killer in town. Every time you watch a horror movie, the serial killer is the big ugly guy. The guy, that guy. The Leatherface, the recluse, the guy from Escape from the Asylum. It's always a guy. What if the scariest person in town, the most dangerous person in town was a 10-year-old girl? So it was me just kind of like miscasting on purpose. And that's how I got it. And once I started her kind of syndrome and explained how this could happen, she's not a normal 10-year-old girl. It just all kind of worked. You come up with these really bad ideas, and then all of your writing is trying to make it work.
At what point in the process of Rachel Rising did you realize you wanted to spin Zoe off into a story?
Not until it was time to start Ever. And then we were thinking, okay, I'm going to do Ever until November. What do you want to do in 2021? And I had been thinking about Zoe a lot. She's one of the most requested characters that I get for sketches. And
she's such a cute little thing.
There's nobody else like her, I feel, one of the things about cartoonists in comic strips is, can you think of a new way to draw a dog or a cat? And that's one of the challenges. If you come up with a new dog, like Mutts, the dogs in Mutts are different than the dogs in Peanuts. And so Mutts is like brilliant because he came up with a new dog. And so if I can come up with a character that's not a trope, hallelujah, right? So I don't know a lot of 10-year-old serial killers in fiction, so I'm glad to have one.
It's very exciting. Yeah. How are you going to tackle that story with the mission of keeping hope in your stories? Back
to the Reanimator part. every time we're facing something scary, like 2020, it's all about how you see it, right? There's a story where when I first started comics, I was afraid to fly. So every time I had to go to a convention, I would white knuckle it through the trip. And one time we were flying out to California, and I'm next to a guy, and I white knuckled the entire trip like this, worried about everything. And I think it was a little stormy and bumpy and everything I don't like. The guy next to me read a newspaper, then took a nap. And we got off the plane. We were disembarking, and I'm like a wreck. And he looks fresh as daisy. And I thought, we just went through the exact same flight experience. And look how I took it. Look how he took it. You know, we had two different experiences on the exact same flight. It was so stark. And so then when I come into things like a horror story, you'll notice that I always have somebody in the story that they're not impressed. They don't care. They're not that, you know, they're distracted by something else. They haven't finished dealing with their sandwich yet. I'll look at the corpse in a minute. I'm still making my lunch, right? So it's kind of like the same thing you would do with satire. If you were a Saturday Night Live writer and you have a lot of news that is very important to the nation, but you need to find a way to stick a pin in that balloon. That's what you're doing, you know. The guy who follows you around in the mall, in real life, that's a bummer. In a comic, you can turn that on that guy and you win this time. And that's the hope, right? I mean, that's the entertainment of it. So it's very gratifying to write that way, actually, you know. I like to take these left turns. Like, it looks like it's going to be the crash that we all fear, or the illness, or the stalker, or the bad boyfriend, something. And we get right up out there and then take a left turn, and you win this time. And that's where the hope is.
Oh, that's beautiful. With that note, I would love to hear if we have some audience questions. I have been monopolizing you for this panel, but if there are some things that you all would like to know. Troy from Maryland, Mr. T-Dog, it looks like there has always been talk about turning Strangers in Paradise into a movie or series. Did you ever have a dream cast? Kachu, Francine, David, Freddie, Parker?
Yes, but the problem is that Strangers in Paradise has been around for quite a while, so my cast has aged out like 3 times. If you know, my original cast is all middle-aged now.
Think of it like theater. You can put it on every 10 years, and it'll win Best Revival.
Yeah, yeah. So the current day cast, I don't know, but the original cast was like we referred to. Maybe Christina Applegate and Jennifer Connelly and Freddie. There were several good Freddie candidates back in the day. I just ran across I saw a promotional ad recently, just like this week, from the cast for Gotham. And the black-haired lady that is on Gotham would be a fantastic Lilith in Rachel Rising, but she could also play Darcy Parker if that went first. So I'm always seeing people that I think, oh, you'd be so great, you know. But I don't know. We'll see. I hope something comes onto the screen in my lifetime. It'd be so nice to see it. If all this stuff comes on after I'm gone, I'll be so mad.
The great. I mean, you have already been very well discovered, but I'd like you to get your laurels while you can appreciate them. Yeah.
I'd like to watch it on the screen, but you know, that can be a mixed blessing. You can think, oh my God, I wish they hadn't made that embarrassment, right?
They might be like, we have a great idea. The ending's totally different. Here's what we're going to do. Everything blows up.
It's all about a boy and his dog. That's the classic script story.
White Whale Comics wants to know, was there a time when you finished an issue and just felt you absolutely nailed it? If so, what issue was it?
The last issue of Strangers in Paradise. I remember approaching those final pages for a few days. And then when I finished it, it was about 8 o'clock at night. And Robin knew I was about to finish. And when I got to the very last deal, she came in and took a photograph, and we marked the moment. But when I did the last pages of that, man, I had like a lump in my throat for a week. And I thought, oh, I'm getting sick. And then I realized, no, I've been on the verge of tears for a week. Because I'm a mush, very mushy inside. And I just kind of poured my heart into it. And I kept my playlist going, my beautiful soundtrack and all that. And God, what a week that was to finish that up. And when I finished it, I thought, I had just spent like 12, 13 years on it. I just finished a 13-year project. You stand up and you think, that's the best band I've ever been in my life. I'll never repeat that. It was like being in the Beatles or something,
I think you made it longer than the Beatles, and not to be morbid about it, but
yeah, we ended on better terms.
You had a lot fewer coworkers to butt up against.
Yeah.
I am curious. Rickbud has a question for Terry. Okay, if he hasn't already said, who are some of your own favorite indie comic creators?
Oh man, that's a long list. Though, oh wow. Yeah, we'd have to just go through my bookshelf right there. But there they are. I like all those
Very
guys.
nice.
I like all those guys. No, I think I like Katie Cook, and I've been friends with Jeff for a very long time, Jeff Smith. Katie Cook is really funny. Jeremy Bastian has a beautiful pen line. He draws these beautiful illustrations in the old style.
Cursed Pirate Girl.
Yeah. God, there's so many. I don't even know. One of my favorite books, I'll pass this on to you, is Spirit of Wonder. It's a manga book from Japan, and Dark Horse published it for the American audience. The art is enchanting, and the story is just totally enchanting. It's kind of like an edgy fairy tale. Spirit of Wonder.
I don't think I know that one. Great, thank you.
Good.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. There's an actual graphic novel, and then there's another book where apparently it was very popular in Japan, and there was a little movie made and all this kind of stuff. But it's not really on the radar here, but it should be.
I do have, I'm going to sneak in another one of my questions. Speaking of the creative teams on your book, which is usually you may be a one-man creative team, but you're not a one-man operation. Can you talk about the role of your collaborators? And I gather Robin has been a big part of the behind the scenes of 30 years of self-publishing?
Yeah, I would not be here if not for Robin, because I am totally ungrounded. And I have no head for business. And I got about 2 years into it on my own. And then I went to her and I said, I really need help to keep going, because the further in you get, the harder it gets. You have more contacts, phone calls, shipping, orders, all that. And so she came in. She has the business head. She's a businesswoman. And she came in and started running it like a business, and I was able to focus on the creative, and that's been the balance ever since. So yeah, and I have found that when you start meeting old cartoonists, anybody with white hair, they have a career because they had a partner. They're mate. Usually a grounded partner that helps them. It almost takes two people looking in the opposite directions to keep it all going. If somebody is a cartoonist, eccentric enough to be a cartoonist, but they're solo, alone, they kind of, make impulsive, emotional decisions, or they don't always collect on the bills or things like that. they can get off the rail. It's hard to keep. We're like dogs in a field. We need somebody to come here. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was curious, what are some of your influences besides other comics on your storytelling style?
That's that other bookshelf right there. I really love, one of the books that I love the most that helped me out when I got into more of my historical fiction, things that were drawn from history, was Bill Bryson. He wrote a book, a nice fat book called A Brief History of Nearly Everything, where he talks about civilization and how we came up with each of our sciences. Especially in the 19th century, we were on a roll coming up with new earth sciences. And he describes the details like a reporter, that oftentimes there were 5 different theories, and they just got into their annual meeting and yelled it out, and whoever won the yelling match is the theory we have now. So I thought that was so funny.
The people going back to ether were very soft-spoken, and they really lost out in the long run.
They didn't argue enough, So I loved his matter of fact writing, and it helped me when it got time to do my my fictional take on nonfiction. It helped me to get a handle on that. But I also love to read physics. Like I listen to all of the Stephen Hawking tapes, and things like that. It lets me feel like I'm on a big. I'm living in a bigger world. It's not just what I see. There's more.
Oh, that's wonderful. I personally, I love art and science, but I know that most people are a lot of people like one or the other and don't dabble both ways. Maybe there's more of us than we think. Maybe we've just been tricked into thinking that everybody else only likes one.
Honest to gosh, I think it's all the same. Because when you get deep enough into science, you really have to use your imagination. There are leaps that you need to be able to put together all the dots. And it's sort of that way with creativity. You have 3 wild ideas that are disconnected, and you pull them together like a recipe, but you have to figure it out. So yeah, they're very much connected. You use the same side of the brain, I think.
I am curious, before we're going to have to wrap up in a little bit, but what is something that you've never gotten a chance to sink your teeth into that you think you might like?
Before I go, I want to write a novel and see how that goes. But I would have to take time off from the comic book schedule because the drawing takes forever. I can write pretty quick, but the drawing takes forever. The other thing that I regret, but I think the ship has sailed, I never got a chance to do a Supergirl series. I think I would have been good on Supergirl.
I think you'd be great on Supergirl. She still exists.
She still exists, but now she belongs to. I don't think they dig into outside people anymore. That you have to be there. But I always felt like she wasn't getting the respect she deserved. She can also pick up and throw the Earth across the moon. I mean, she should have been. And every time they had 3 main DC characters, she should have been one of them. And she can kick Wonder Woman's butt. I don't understand why they decided on Wonder Woman, but they always treated her like a sidekick, like Krypto. She was no more important than Krypto, and they just always sent her off planet to deal with aliens and stuff. And I felt like she had no life. I don't know her apartment and her boyfriend and her wardrobe and who her best friend is and what she does on her days off, and none of that. They just had something, a spaceship crash. Go deal with it. There's no life. I wanted to do that.
I think there would be a big audience for that. And you never know what experiments, if you're listening, DC, there is a legendary comics creator who you should probably call to do maybe some of the digital first stuff. I know they have to scan your paper in and put it on the internet. I'm just saying. We would all check it out. And I think you were early on the fact that now in the DC television universe, they have their own Trinity, and she is one of the 3. It's Flash and Green Arrow and Supergirl. which I think us fans from the 90s did not accurately predict that that's where that would go, but it proves the potential that those characters have.
I have a take on Flash too that would work in Einstein's universe, and it would make a Flash story that would be very interesting and a lot better than, oh, he's just really fast.
Well, you can't drop tantalizing hints like that when we're out of time. But where can people keep track of your work best, or how is best for them to keep up with everything you're doing and Studio Sundays and TerryCon?
Yeah. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and it's Terry Moore Art on all of those handles. That's my address. So yeah, I'm easy to find on the internet, and I have a website and a YouTube channel. So catch me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me for this is my first Baltimore. I've never actually gotten to go. So thank you for giving me an incredible first Baltimore Comic-Con experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with me. It's a great show.
Excellent. Enjoy. If you're watching this, please stay tuned. There's so much more good stuff to come. And thank you so much, Terry Moore.
My pleasure. My pleasure.